Hello and welcome to Let's Go Frightseeing. I'm Taylor, and it's always spooky season here. Hello and welcome to Let's Go Frightseeing. This week we are taking the haunted school bus all the way to Rome, Italy for some dark history and hauntings. I had the opportunity to travel to Rome over the summer. It was incredible. Everything was so beautiful. The people were so cool. And of course, the food was fantastic. I still think about it. The first thing I do whenever I book a trip somewhere new is I book a local food tour and a haunted history tour. The best way to learn about any culture is through their food and their spooky history, in my opinion. And as always, I'm going to do my very best with the Italian pronunciations, but unfortunately, I'm American, so I'm only going to be able to do so much. I cannot promise you perfection, but I will try my very best. One of my favorite places that we visited was Castel Sant'angelo. Castel Sant'angelo is located near the Vatican on the banks of the River Tiber. It is a gorgeous castle that was originally built as a mausoleum for Emperor Hadrian and his family in 135 AD. The main structure of Castel Sant'angelo is a large round building that was once the tallest building in Rome. There is a fortress wall built around it from the time that it was used as a castle and a prison. There was also a point that the popes lived there. In fact, there is a secret, quote-unquote secret, it's not really a secret, but we pretend it is. There's a secret tunnel that is called the Passetto, and it connects the Vatican City to Castel Sant'angelo, so the Pope can safely get there if there is any kind of an emergency situation. Today, Castel Sant'angelo is a museum that you can visit to see the beautiful architecture, painted ceilings, a ton of artwork, and even have a nice cup of coffee or a cocktail up on the roof. It has a gorgeous view of the city, so much so that it's easy to forget the very dark history that surrounds this staple of Rome. One place where people experience bad vibes in the castle is known as the Urn Room. The Urn Room used to hold the ashes of Emperor Hadrian and 5 following emperors, but when the castle was under attack in the 400s, the urns were smashed to smithereens and the ashes were thrown into the river. People who visit the Urn Room often get chills, even in the hot Roman summers, and trust me, it gets hot in that castle. Very sweaty, yikes. But people will still experience a cold chill in this room. Some people have reported seeing a black, misty figure follow them up the stairs in this area of the castle, and some people even say they will have this sudden burst of anger and annoyance in this area. Could this be the bad vibes of the angry spirits of the emperors whose rest was destroyed, causing you to feel unsettled? I mean, it could be because it's so extremely hot and you're on vacation with your family, so everyone's probably annoying you by that point, but what if it's actually the spirits of these emperors? And then let's talk about the interesting lore behind where this castle gets its name. In 590, during one of Rome's many, many plagues, Pope Gregory gathered a large group of people to walk the streets like a parade, praying for mercy from God so that they wouldn't keep losing hundreds of people to this plague. As this parade route crossed the bridge in front of the castle, Pope Gregory looked up and said that he saw on top of the rotunda a vision of the archangel St. Michael. St. Michael was glowing and holding a giant bloody sword, and as the Pope continued staring at this glowing vision, St. Michael put the sword away, and Pope Gregory was like, "Besties, look, this is a sign that the plague is coming to an end." The plague was not coming to an end, but he tried his best. The plague went on for another 2 years and killed thousands more people, but I appreciate the positivity from Pope Gregory. Even though this plague continued on, people were re-inspired by the Pope's vision, and they started calling this Castel Sant'angelo, meaning Castle of the Holy Angel, and a huge statue of St. Michael the Archangel was built and put on the top. Even though the Pope's vision was not necessarily correct, and the plague continued raging on, they still decided to make this change, and they built this angel, and it has had quite the run up on top of this building. The first version of this angel was made of wood, but eventually an upgrade was made to marble. The marble version was destroyed in an attack on the castle in the 1300s, and then finally a new one was put up that was made of marble with bronze wings. However, like I mentioned earlier, this was the tallest building in Rome at the time, so that bronze angel was quickly struck by lightning and it destroyed part of the tower. A fourth angel made of bronze covered in gold was put back on the roof years later, but it didn't last long because it was melted down to make cannonballs. A fifth angel was put up in 1544, but eventually replaced with a sixth and final version in 1752. The sixth angel is the one that still stands on top of the castle today. He's very handsome, he's strapping, he's got big muscles, and it's very dramatic. And this version also has a lightning rod a beautiful, beautiful lightning rod directly behind it, just in case. There is a gorgeous bridge directly in front of Castel Sant'angelo called the Ponte Sant'angelo that crosses the River Tiber. It has these beautiful angel statues lining either side, protecting people who walk across this bridge, and it is a really well-known piece of Rome. However, you already know I wouldn't be mentioning it in this episode if it didn't also have a dark history twist. This bridge obviously carried noblemen, popes, emperors, your everyday townsperson, but it was also the site of thousands of executions, including one very well-known execution of the Cenci family in 1599. So Count Francesco Cenci was, to put it simply, a total piece of crap. He was extremely wealthy, and he treated everyone around him like garbage, especially his own family. Francesco and his wife, Ercilia, had 5 children. Their oldest son disowned his family. He didn't want their money, he didn't want their name, and he didn't care that he was stepping away from a noble family. He just wanted to get away from his father, and I don't blame him. 2 of their other sons were killed in duels, and that left their daughters, Beatrice and Antonia, to deal with their horrid father. I hope I am pronouncing her name correctly. It's spelt like the American named Beatrice, but I believe it's pronounced Beatrice. So, I'm sorry, I'm doing my best. Ercilia died when the girls were young, and Francesco remarried a woman named Lucrezia. He had 1 son with her, and Lucrezia helped raise the girls. Francesco found himself in and out of prison for various things, but his noble status earned him nothing more than a slap on the wrist, and he'd go back out and continue terrorizing everyone around him. He was physically and sexually abusive toward his wife and children, and when they would beg the authorities for help, nothing was done. Beatrice definitely got the worst of it. Eventually, once Beatrice was in her teens, the remaining family members were sent away from Rome, where they couldn't keep reporting Francesco's awful crimes and abuse. He basically, instead of fixing his disgusting ways, he just sent them away so that they couldn't tell anyone about it and continued being a despicable human being. Francesco just couldn't leave them alone. He would visit their castle regularly to make everyone as miserable as possible, and Beatrice decided enough was enough. She had asked for help time and time again, and nothing was ever done, so she went to her family with a proposition. Realizing that they had run out of options and no one was going to help them get away from their terrible husband/father, the Cenci family decided to plot a way to get rid of Francesco for good, and let's just say it, good for them, okay? One night while Francesco was visiting, the family slipped a sleeping poison into his drink, and when he was knocked out, they beat him in the head and threw him out a window. The story was that he was an awful drunk who simply flew into a rage and subsequently stumbled and fell out of a window on a 70-foot high tower turret. You know, honestly, it wouldn't have been that hard to believe. However, they did overdo things. The fall alone probably would have been enough to kill him, but the damage done to his head didn't line up with falling out of a window, so the authorities were immediately suspicious. Eventually, Beatrice, her stepmother Lucrezia, her older brother Giacomo, and her 12-year-old brother, Bernardo, were all arrested and thrown into the dungeons under Castel Sant'angelo. One could argue that having a 12-year-old imprisoned for murder is insane, but apparently the Pope at this time, Pope Clement VIII, saw an opportunity here. Allegedly. If all of the Cenci family was executed, there would be no heir to the family's wealth or land, so Pope Clement VIII sentenced them all to death. Because allegedly, how convenient for the church and for the Pope that no one was there to inherit this wealth and this land, so it would go to the church. The people of Rome were very sympathetic to Beatrice and her family, knowing what they knew about Francesco, and they protested the ruling of the execution, but like I said, the Pope had something to gain if the Cenci family was no more. So on September 11th, 1599, the Cenci family was executed by beheading in front of Castel Sant'angelo, and at the last second, the youngest son was spared, but he was sentenced to be a servant for the rest of his life, and the Pope still confiscated the land and the fortune. Beatrice has become a symbol of resistance against aristocracy. Why can I not say that word? Aristocracy. And legend has it that her spirit appears on the bridge every September with her head in her hands, looking for revenge. It is also said that she is a protector of women, and men who are abusive to women in any way will feel her rage as they cross the bridge. We love to see it. We love to see a ghostly queen out there making life miserable for miserable, horrible, abusive people. On we go. Speaking of executions, did you like that segue? Let's talk about the River Tiber. The River Tiber is often considered haunted because it was a great place to dump bodies of lawbreakers after they were executed. Like I mentioned, the enjoyment of public executions was a fun family outing for many places, and Rome was no exception. Executions took place in front of the Castel Sant'angelo, where people would gather to watch. There were all kinds of things dumped in the River Tiber. It's very, very polluted. Our tour guide pointed out that it is definitely not safe to swim in or drink the river water, and she said, if you ever see someone fishing in the river, call the police, because something is very, very wrong. One of the more well-known legends about the river is that perhaps the ghost of Emperor Nero's spirit walks the banks to this day. Emperor Nero ruled from 54 to 68 AD and is a very controversial figure in Roman politics, to put it simply. He started off on the right foot, as many horrible, selfish tyrants do, but eventually he let the power of his position get to his head. In the beginning, Nero wanted to get rid of capital punishment, lower taxes, and it seemed like he was on the path to make Romans a lot happier. But then he took a sharp turn into thinking that everyone was against him, and eventually he killed his own mother and other members of his family. And he also reinstated the death penalty that he originally took away. There is some debate among historians as to whether he had something to do with the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. Many historians blame Nero's incompetence, even go as far as saying that he called for the fires that burnt 70% of the city while he watched from on top of a hill. The legend that has stuck with Nero, that is brought up a lot and portrayed in comics and things like that, is that Nero played the fiddle and sang while the fire destroyed the city under his orders because he wanted to rebuild it in his own way and he thought he knew better than everybody else. Whatever the truth actually is, Nero took a lot of blame for this fire, so he turned and placed blames on the Christians, which is rude. He got more and more out of control, and eventually the Romans decided to revolt, and the Senate declared Nero a public enemy, which meant that anyone could kill him without facing any consequences. Nero didn't want to take any chances, so he fled and took his own life. He was buried at the foot of the Pincian Hill. Pincian. I'm sorry. He was buried at the foot of this hill with the rest of his family. The legend goes that a walnut tree sprouted right over his grave, and it was always full of these giant, loud crows, and allegedly, witches and demons were seen having feasts there with Nero's ghost and these crows. People complained about this tree for centuries until 1099 when it was torn out of the ground along with Nero's grave. Pope Pascal II performed an exorcism and had the tree and the grave destroyed, and Nero's remains were thrown into the River Tiber and the alleged hauntings stopped. However, many people believe that his remains are buried somewhere else, that his remains are not in the river, maybe they are in the river. People who believe that the remains are in the river have said that Nero's angry spirit still walks the riverbanks where his remains were so unceremoniously dumped. It's so interesting that when you go back far enough, there are things that we don't know because they've been lost to time and to history, and we come up with our own stories for what happened. As previously mentioned, executions were very popular, and there is one Roman executioner that stands out more than any other. Giovanni Battista Bugatti was only 17 years old when he became an executioner in 1796. Legend has it that he applied for the job when he was 16, but the Pope at the time thought 16 was too young, so Giovanni was sent away for a year and then given a job when he was 17, because apparently that's a huge difference. I don't know. Giovanni was described as portly and always very well dressed. He was very good at his job and played into the theatrics that the public hoped for at these executions. Giovanni was given the nickname Mastro Tita, meaning Master of Justice. When people saw Giovanni crossing the bridge to Castel Sant'angelo in his red executioner's robes, they would excitedly tell their friends, Mastro Tita is crossing the bridge, which meant it was time to gather round for a bloody execution. I imagine that it kind of worked like the telephone game. The people who worked closest to the bridge would then tell the shops next to them and so on until everyone could go gather and witness a horrific, disturbing public execution with their friends. Families would gather around to watch, and as the guillotine dropped onto a criminal's neck, fathers would smack the backs of their son's neck as a reminder that if they didn't stay out of trouble, Mastro Tita would have their heads. Giovanni called these executions justices, and he kept a very detailed notebook of each of these justices with names, dates, and manners of execution over the 68 years, yes, you heard me correctly, 68 years that he performed these executions. In that time, Giovanni performed 514 executions and retired in 1864 at the age of 85. During his time as an executioner, he also had a shop where he sold painted umbrellas, to make ends meet, because being an executioner had its slow seasons, I guess. Apparently, he lived in an apartment across the river from the castle with his wife and was only allowed to travel within a few blocks for his own safety. The Pope worried that Giovanni's job could put a target on his back, so he had him stay within the city limits. Giovanni got a pension after retiring at age 85, and he died 5 years later, which means he was 90, which isn't that like unheard of in that time? 1870? Wasn't the average lifespan like 50 years old? Giovanni was a spooky dude. He had like spirits on his side or something. I don't know, because 90 is very old for that time. Anyways, his robe and executioner's axe are on display at the Museum of Criminology in Rome, and supposedly for a time his apartment was available to rent and was allegedly super haunted. Just the usual things: cold spots, knocking coming from nowhere, footsteps, certain smells in the apartment. Giovanni was someone who worked hand in hand with death himself, so it wouldn't surprise me if there are some vibes lingering around his old apartment. I have one more interesting dark history story about Rome, and that is the story of Guilia Tofana, who was described as the queenpin of the criminal magical underworld. Okay, that's a slay. The story of Giulia is told in many different ways because it is so old and a lot of urban legend has been mixed in with the facts. But to give you an overview, Giulia lived in Rome in the mid to late 1600s. Around 1633, she opened a sort of apothecary shop where women could go and get makeup products, skincare, perfumes, things like that. Like a Sephora, except that it was all a front for a poison scheme. During this time, women had very few options because they weren't allowed to own land or have money of their own or, basic rights without a man being in charge of everything that they do. Yikes. So the options became: one, they were basically sold off to a man to marry who treated them like garbage and made their lives absolutely miserable. Two, they could stay single and rely on sex work to get by. Or three, inherit money and land when their much older husband died, which still required option one. Bleak, okay? Bleak times. Many, many young women found themselves in horribly abusive, dangerous marriages, and Giulia offered them a pretty unsavory, but a way out. Giulia would sell vials that looked like perfume with a potion called aqua tofana. Aqua tofana was most likely made of arsenic, lead, antimony, and belladonna. Obviously, this was not perfume, but it was a poison that was colorless, odorless, and could kill a person with just a few drops mixed into their evening glass of wine or a cup of tea. Because there weren't tests to detect poisons, and because people dropped dead randomly all the time during these times, these horrible husbands would die, and no one would suspect a thing. No one would look further into it. Giulia had a sort of gang, a circle of women who worked for her making and selling this potion. Everyone kept the secret, and it went on for decades. Eventually, a 16-year-old girl, 16-year-old girl married to a highly abusive 50-year-old man, felt that she had no way out, and she needed to kill her husband before he killed her. Things didn't go as planned, and the man figured out that his drink had been poisoned, and he basically beat a confession out of this young woman, and she told him everything. In 1651, Giulia and some of her fellow poison distributors were caught, and she confessed to being responsible for around 600 deaths. The details get a little cloudy here because some accounts say that she fled, others say that she was sentenced to death with her crime ring. On the haunted history tour we went on, we walked past the apartment that is believed to be where Giulia lived. If you are watching on YouTube, that is what this clip is. I think I could do a future episode all about Giulia Tofana and her criminal ring. What did they call her? The queen pin of the criminal magical underworld. It's just, I'm sorry. I know it was a crime. I know it's bad. But I kind of, listen. The name slays, all right? I think I'm going to do an episode about her if you want to hear that in the future. Going back through my photos and videos from Rome made me miss it so much. If you are from Rome or if you have the chance to visit Rome, you have to do it. If you are from Rome, I love you. Thank you for letting me come and enjoy your beautiful history and your beautiful streets. And if you've never been to Rome and it's on your bucket list, do it. It's so worth it. It's a beautiful city full of the most wonderful people and the most delicious food, but also so much fun, spooky history to explore and learn about. So go, do it. Put it on your list. Make it happen. Also, in the description for this episode, I'm going to have a link to a Google form that you can fill out if you have a spooky story to share with me, whether it's from Rome, whether it's from your own house, whatever spooky story that you've experienced, a haunting, something paranormal, maybe you met an alien. I want to hear about it and share it in a future episode. So to make that super easy, there is a link to a Google form that you just fill out and you put your story in there and it sends directly to me, and then I will share it in a future episode. Until next time, stay spooky and maybe eat some pasta, because now it's all I can think about after talking about Rome for so long. Anyways, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.